I should have known the moment I saw the envelope on my locker at Seattle Medical Center that nothing good was waiting inside. It was a plain white envelope with my name written in a hurried mechanical pen stroke. No return address, no explanation. The kind of thing that makes your stomach drop before your fingers even touch it. Inside was a printed memo from the hospital compliance office, informing me that I was being placed on temporary administrative leave, pending an investigation into an anonymous report questioning my stability and professionalism. I stood there reading the words again and again, while the hallway around me kept moving, nurses calling out updates, stretchers rolling past, the usual controlled chaos of a weekday morning. My world narrowed into a single line. Concerns have been raised regarding your emotional fitness for patient care. For a long moment, I could not breathe. I thought of all the years I had worked in those halls, the double shifts, the cases that had aged me 10 years in the space of one night, the quiet victories that no one outside the department ever hears about. I thought of how rarely anyone ever questioned my judgment, not even during my divorce 2 years earlier when I came to work swollen-eyed and hollowed out, but still steady enough in the operating room. The idea that someone would accuse me of instability felt like a punch beneath the ribs. It also felt intentional. Whoever wrote that report had used details too specific to be coincidence. I drove home straight from the hospital, even though the day had barely begun. I kept replaying the language in that memo, every phrase sounding more pointed than the last. By the time I reached my parents' house in Kern County, a small suburban stretch east of Tacoma where I had grown up, I had convinced myself that maybe being around family would help settle the spinning inside my head. Maybe they would hear me out, ask what happened, remind me that one accusation would not define the career I had built. My parents' kitchen was full of weekend noise when I walked in. Helen was pulling a casserole out of the oven, the smell of rosemary filling the room, while Mark stood at the counter slicing bread. Olivia was there too, leaning against the fridge with a glass of wine, at what had to be barely noon, chatting with 2 of our aunts who had dropped by after a church fundraiser. I hesitated at the doorway long enough for my mother to turn and smile. "There you are, sweetie. I thought you were working today." I swallowed the tightness in my throat and stepped in. "I need to tell you all something. It is important." The room quieted just a bit, though not enough. Olivia glanced over, eyebrows lifted as if she already suspected drama. I set my bag down and tried to find my voice. "I was placed on leave this morning. The hospital got an anonymous report saying I might not be emotionally stable enough to practice." Aunt Cheryl gasped the way she always did whenever someone mentioned anything remotely personal. Mark stopped slicing bread. My mother's smile faded into something small and unsettled. "What do you mean emotionally unstable, sweetheart?" she asked slowly, as if she did not want to offend me. "You have always been the reliable one." Before I could answer, Olivia let out a sound. It was not quite a laugh, but close enough to freeze me where I stood. A short, sharp choke of amusement followed by an actual laugh, bright and careless. "Oh, come on, Laura. Someone finally called you out and you are acting like the world is ending." Her voice carried across the kitchen. "You have been wound tight for years. None of this is surprising." My cheeks burned. Everyone's eyes swung toward her, expecting maybe a joke to soften what she had said. But Olivia only lifted her glass slightly as if making a toast, eyes glittering with something that was not concern. I stared at her because that was the only thing I could do without breaking in half. My mother touched her arm as if to quiet her, but Olivia shook her off. It was the same tone she had used when we were kids, and she caught me making a mistake. The same tone she used whenever she wanted to remind me that she was the one people listened to. "This is not a joke, Olivia." My voice wavered more than I wanted it to. The report had details from my divorce, from things I only told family. Someone used that against me. Helen looked between us, wringing her hands. "Maybe this is all a misunderstanding. Maybe it is just a routine review. Your sister did not mean anything by her comment." But Olivia smiled wider, finished her wine, and set the glass down with a little click that hit me like a slap. "Honestly, Laura, you fall apart so easily. Maybe you should take this as a wake-up call. Some of us learn to handle pressure without complaining." Something inside me shifted. I had felt humiliation before. I had felt disappointment, anger, confusion. But this moment had a different weight. Maybe it was the timing. Maybe it was the way she said it in front of our family. Or maybe it was the look in her eyes. A look that said she was enjoying this. a look that belonged to the same girl who used to smirk when she stole my lines in school plays or spread rumors she knew I could not disprove. Except this time it was not about a childhood embarrassment or a ruined friendship. This time it was my career, my life. Mark cleared his throat as if wanting to say something, but Olivia cut in again. Look, all I am saying is that if someone at your hospital thinks you are not stable, maybe take a breath before assuming you are the victim here. Victim. The word stung. The person who had stood by family every time they needed help. The one who skipped vacations to check on our mother. The one who drove home for every doctor appointment, every holiday, every emotional storm. Somehow I was the victimizer now. And the person dismissing me was the same sister who claimed to love family more than anything. I looked at her the way you look at a stranger who vaguely resembles someone you once trusted. Then something crystallized. A clarity I had been circling for years without touching. Olivia was not surprised I had been accused. She was pleased. My mother finally found her voice. Olivia, that is enough. Laura is having a hard day. You do not need to make it worse. Olivia shrugged as if it made no difference to her whether I broke down or walked out. She picked up her phone and started scrolling. I watched the movement of her thumb across the screen and felt a cold ripple of recognition. Her laugh, her casual cruelty, her complete lack of shock, and the fact that the anonymous report had information only family could know. For the first time it occurred to me that this was not simply Olivia being Olivia. This felt deliberate. I thought back to the envelope, the memo, the phrasing. Details from my private life that were not public record, my divorce, my therapy sessions, things only someone close would know. I took a step back, steadying myself against the counter. Nobody seemed to notice except maybe Mark, who looked at me with something like uncertainty, maybe even guilt. But he said nothing. I needed air, so I walked out to the porch, closing the door behind me. My pulse thudded in my ears. The cold February air bit at my skin, but it helped me breathe. Somewhere inside the house, Olivia laughed again at something someone said, her voice ringing through the walls as if nothing in the world was out of place. I stood there with the weight of the memo in my bag and a knot tightening in my chest. For years I had told myself Olivia's digs were harmless, the kind of sibling rivalry everyone dealt with. For years I convinced myself she could not really mean the things she said, not deep down. But standing in that doorway, listening to her laugh at my lowest moment, something old and familiar rose up inside me, a truth I had been avoiding for a long time. Olivia did not want me to recover. She wanted me to fall, and this time it felt like she had made sure I did. I sat there on the porch steps until the cold began to settle into my bones, long enough for the numbness to dull the sharp edges of what had just happened inside that kitchen. The house behind me hummed with the muffled rise and fall of conversation, Olivia's voice lifting above the others now and then, like she had already moved on. It struck me how easily she did that, how quickly she stepped out of the wreckage she created and then acted as if nothing had fallen apart in the first place. A gust of wind cut across the yard and carried with it the faint echo of children playing somewhere down the block. The sound pulled something loose in my memory, something old and still tender. I had been trying to avoid thinking about the past, especially on a day that had already taken too much out of me, but my mind slid there anyway, following familiar tracks the way a river follows its bed. When Olivia and I were kids, battles between us were never loud. She did not throw tantrums or break things the way some siblings do. She preferred small, precise moves, the kind nobody noticed until you were already bleeding from a cut you could not see. It started young. I remembered being 9 and sitting in the back seat on the way home from school, clutching the little certificate I had gotten for finishing the year with the highest reading score. I had worked for weeks on that, reading every library book I could find, proud in the rare, bright way kids sometimes feel when they discover something they're good at. I could still hear Olivia's voice from that afternoon, light and careless as she told our mother that she had gotten a part in the school talent show. It was not true. She had not even auditioned. But she knew the fastest way to redirect attention was simply to reach out and take it. Mom clapped her hands and celebrated Olivia's imaginary accomplishment while my certificate quietly bent in my lap. I never said anything. I think I wanted to believe that it was a one-time thing. Later that year, Olivia told a neighbor that I cheated on a math test. The rumor spread so fast the teacher asked me to stay after class. I cried, not because of the accusation, but because I could see the satisfaction on Olivia's face when I walked out of the school looking small, there was always that look, a flicker of victory, faint but unmistakable. And every time it happened, I told myself I must have misunderstood, that sisters were complicated, that she did not really mean it. The wind picked up again and I wrapped my arms around myself, staring at the porch railing. I wondered how many times in my life I had rewritten reality just to make Olivia easier to love. A soft creak sounded from the door behind me, and I turned as Mark stepped out. He wore that same expression he always had in moments like this, a mixture of concern and the kind of conflict that comes from wanting to comfort one daughter without upsetting the other. "You all right, kiddo?" I nodded, though nothing inside me felt steady, just needed some air. He sat beside me, leaving a polite bit of space between us. For a while, we listened to the wind and the distant chatter of guests drifting through the walls. I waited for him to say something reassuring, or even something honest. But when he finally spoke, it felt scripted, like lines he had practiced for years. "Your sister does not always think before she speaks. You know that. She has a lot on her plate." I let out a breath that was too close to a laugh. She knew exactly what she was doing. Mark did not look at me. I wondered if it was because he feared what he might see. Maybe he already knew. Maybe he had always known. The silence stretched between us until it felt heavy enough to snap. "When I was a kid, I asked you once why Olivia never got in trouble for anything. Do you remember that?" He flinched a little. "I do. You told me she was sensitive, that I was stronger, that I could handle more." His shoulders lifted with a slow breath. That was the truth as I understood it at the time. I looked down at my hands, at the faint tremor still running through them. "She is not sensitive, though, not in the way you meant. She is something else entirely, and you all kept feeding it like it was harmless." The door opened again and a wave of laughter spilled out. Olivia's voice rose above the others, bright and unbothered. I felt something twist inside me. Mark opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something more, but then shut it and stood. "Let me know if you want me to drive you home." I nodded without answering, and he went back in. I stayed on the porch until the sun slid lower and the shadows stretched across the lawn. The air smelled like cut grass and wood smoke from a neighbor's backyard fire pit. Familiar scents, comforting ones, the kind that should have made me feel anchored. Instead, they made me feel like a stranger in a place that had once been mine. Behind the kitchen window, I saw Olivia move past the sink, laughing at something Aunt Cheryl said. Her face looked exactly as it had when we were children, and she had just gotten away with something. Open, bright, victorious. I watched her lift her phone and type something, smiling as she hit send. For a moment, I wondered if that satisfaction in her eyes was the same one I had seen years ago, when she read my diary to her friends, or when she lied about me skipping that volunteer shift, or when she hid my college acceptance letter behind her dresser for 2 weeks because she did not want me getting attention. Even then, I had convinced myself she was acting out of insecurity. Now it felt less like insecurity and more like habit, a pattern so old she had forgotten it had teeth. I stood and walked down the porch steps into the yard, my feet crunching against the gravel as memories kept rising whether I wanted them or not. I remembered freshman year when Olivia told the entire bus that I cried myself to sleep. I remembered the homecoming dance I skipped because she spread a rumor that I stuffed my bra. I remembered sophomore summer when she told our cousins that I had ruined her favorite sweater, even though she had torn it herself days earlier. Every memory had the same ending: Olivia laughing, Olivia brushing it off, Olivia turning my pain into her entertainment. And every time, I had forgiven her. Or maybe I had simply erased the hurt, because keeping it would have meant admitting something I was not ready to admit. I reached the edge of the yard, where the fence met the neighbor's garden. The fading light touched the tops of the trees and cast everything in a tired golden hue. I closed my eyes and let the quiet settle around me. The truth I had avoided for years slowly took its shape. Olivia was not just careless with me. She was dangerous. She always had been. Only now her methods had changed. No longer petty school rumors or sabotaging friendships. Now it was my reputation, my livelihood, my stability. Something shifted in me as the last of the sunlight slipped away. Not anger, not yet. It was something quieter and heavier. A recognition, a beginning. I walked back toward the house, passing the kitchen window again. Olivia was alone at the counter now, refilling her glass, humming lightly as if the world fit neatly in her hands. When she tipped her head back to take a sip, The light caught her face, and for a second I saw that same triumphant smirk she wore when she knew she had the upper hand. The knot in my chest tightened, but this time it did not pull me down. It braced me. I opened the front door and stepped inside, ready to move without showing her a thing. Whatever had started today was not going to end with me crying on a porch. Not this time. I stepped into the house and the warmth hit me all at once. The mix of voices and clinking dishes, and the faint smell of rosemary that had drifted from the kitchen earlier. Nothing had changed in the few minutes I had been outside. Olivia was still by the counter, swirling her wine as if she were waiting for someone to ask her opinion on something trivial. My mother was arranging plates even though half the people in the room already had one. My father had returned to his usual place near the hallway, watching without quite participating. The familiar scene pressed against me like an old coat that no longer fit. I walked past all of them with a small nod and headed toward the living room, needing a second to steady myself before trying to absorb anything else. The carpet there was the same faded beige from my childhood, the same one Mom swore she would replace every year, but never did because it reminded her of when we were young. I sat on the couch and let my fingers trail along its edge, trying to breathe through the pressure building at the base of my throat. From the kitchen, I heard my mother say something in a whisper, and Olivia answer with a clipped sound that was meant to be discreet but carried anyway. A few relatives had gathered near the island and were looking at their plates in that polite way people do when they have heard too much. I caught one aunt glancing toward the living room as if she wondered whether she should come sit with me. She didn't. No one ever did in this house unless they were asked. The memories that had chased me outside came flooding back again. But now they had company. I remembered family holidays where Olivia held court at the dinner table, telling exaggerated stories that positioned her as the star, while everyone watched her with fond indulgence. I remembered offering to help Mom with dishes when I was 14 and being told that Olivia needed the practice more because I was already responsible enough. I remembered begging my father once to back me up when Olivia insisted I had forgotten to pick her up from soccer practice, even though she had taken a ride from a friend and never told anyone. He had rubbed his forehead and said he did not want to get involved. Those things had never seemed worth confronting. I spent years telling myself that every family had flaws, that siblings fought, that birth order came with its own quirks. But earlier today, listening to Olivia laugh at the worst moment of my life, all the explanations I had crafted over decades had cracked apart. A pair of footsteps approached the living room and I braced myself, expecting Aunt Cheryl or my mother. Instead, it was my father. He eased himself into the recliner across from me and folded his hands over his stomach, taking a breath as if he had rehearsed this moment on his way in. "Your mother is worried," he said quietly. "She thinks maybe she should talk to the hospital for you." I shook my head. That would make it worse. And it is not something she can fix. He nodded with a faint hum, the kind of sound people make when they want to offer comfort, but cannot find the shape of the words. Then he leaned forward an inch. "Do you think someone is trying to hurt your career?" There was something about the way he asked that question that made it harder than it should have been. Maybe it was the suggestion that he already suspected the answer. Maybe it was the fact that he still would not say her name. "I think someone used personal information about me," I said. "Someone who should not have had it." He looked down at his hands. Olivia would never do something like that. The words were so familiar I could have spoken them myself. They were the same words he had used when I was 12 and Olivia blamed me for breaking her bike. The same ones he had used when she told people I had cheated on a test. The same ones he used when I tried to tell him she had hidden my college acceptance letter. A reflex, automatic and absolute. "She would," I said quietly. "You just never wanted to see it." He looked toward the doorway as if searching for an escape. In that moment, I realized he was not defending Olivia because he believed she was incapable of harm. He was defending her because admitting what she had done would require him to acknowledge every time he had failed to protect me from her. That was a weight he was not willing to pick up. Before he could respond, my mother entered carrying a plate of appetizers she clearly did not expect me to eat. She placed it on the table and sat on the edge of the couch, smoothing her skirt like she was preparing for a performance she did not want to give. "Laura," she said softly, "I know things feel tense right now. Your sister did not mean anything by what she said. It has been a stressful week for her at work. She has been stretched thin." I closed my eyes for a second, fighting the instinct to apologize just to keep the peace. That instinct had been built into me long before adulthood ever arrived, but today I could not reach for it. Mom, she enjoyed it. You know she did. Helen flinched at the honesty, not the words, but the fact that I had said them out loud. She clasped her hands together and stared at her fingers. Your sister has always felt insecure next to you, she murmured. She tries hard, but things have always come easier to you. School, work, everything. People look at you and see strength. They look at her and see someone who needs help. I guess she just reacts to that. I almost laughed. Everything I had that resembled success came from clawing my way toward it. Olivia had been lifted and cushioned her entire life. But in my mother's mind, the story had been rewritten so that Olivia was the fragile one, and I was the one who could absorb unlimited damage. So that makes it fine for her to humiliate me, to spread stories, to sabotage me, because she feels insecure. No one is saying that, Mom whispered, but the words faded as soon as she spoke them. Her eyes dropped again. In the dining room, Olivia laughed loudly at something one of the aunts said. A warm, easy laugh, the kind she only used when she felt admired. I stood because staying seated made me feel too contained, too much like the teenager I had once been. My father kept his eyes on the carpet. My mother watched me as if she wanted to reach out, but did not know how. I looked at them both and felt a strange mixture of sadness and clarity. They were not going to help me. They were not willing to see what was happening. In their minds, Olivia had always been the one who needed gentleness, and I had always been the one who would get over it. The roles were too old and too comfortable to change now. I am heading home, I said finally. I need to think. Mom rose halfway as if she wanted to stop me, but then she sat back down and smoothed her skirt again. Let us know if you need anything. I nodded and walked toward the front door. As I passed the kitchen, Olivia lifted her glass in a little wave, her smile sharp and careless. Rough day, huh? Maybe things will look better tomorrow. I did not answer. I opened the door and stepped outside, where the fading light made everything look washed out and strangely quiet. My car sat at the curb under a street lamp that was starting to flicker on. I walked toward it feeling something unfold inside me, something that felt like resolve. What happened at the hospital was no accident, and whatever Olivia had started, it was bigger than a laugh and bigger than a scene in a kitchen full of relatives. By the time I reached the car, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If I wanted the truth, I was going to have to find it myself. I drove back to my place in Seattle with the kind of focus that comes when every thought is circling the same point. By the time I pulled into the parking garage beneath my apartment building, the sky had gone a muted gray that matched the way my chest felt. I sat in the car for a moment, hands on the wheel, trying to settle the rising sense that the ground under me had shifted for good. The hospital, the memo, Olivia. It all braided together into something cold and unwelcome. When I finally stepped out of the car and made my way upstairs, the hallway lights flickered the way they always did on weekends when the building manager put off maintenance. It was strangely comforting, that bit of predictability. I unlocked my door and felt the familiar quiet wrap around me as I walked inside. My apartment had always been my place to come back to after long days at the medical center, a place where I could breathe without feeling watched or evaluated. Tonight, even that quiet felt unsettled. I set my keys on the counter and grabbed a glass of water, then sat at the small kitchen table, staring at the stack of mail I had not touched all week. None of it mattered in that moment. All I could think about was the memo and the way Dr. Ethan Clark had looked at me when he delivered the news. Concerned but professional, careful, like he was talking to someone standing on the edge of a cliff. I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled until I found a message from Grace Chen. She had texted earlier, offering to talk if I needed anything. I hesitated, then called her. She answered on the second ring. I thought you might call tonight. How are you holding up? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I wish I knew the answer to that. Grace paused, and when she spoke again, her voice softened. I looked at that email you forwarded to me. The phrasing did not feel random. It felt pointed. Someone wrote it like they knew exactly where to hit. I closed my eyes, feeling that same sting in my ribs. Someone did know. That is the part I cannot get past. Grace exhaled, the sound full of sympathy and something sharper. Then we should look closer. I can examine the metadata for you. It might help us track down where it came from, or at least what kind of device was used. Her calm confidence steadied me. That would help a lot. Thank you. After we hung up, I spent the next hour pacing from the kitchen to the living room, trying not to let my imagination sprint ahead of the facts. But every time my thoughts touched the idea that Olivia might have sent that report, something inside me tightened. I had told myself earlier that I needed proof. Now that need felt like a pulse under my skin. The next morning, I drove to the medical center to meet with Ethan. My temporary leave meant I was not allowed on the clinical floors, but the administrative building was open to me. I walked in with a mix of dread and determination, feeling every curious glance from staff who had heard bits of the story already. Hospitals carry news like wildfire, especially when it involves one of their own. Ethan waved me into his office. He looked tired, the way he always did after a weekend on trauma call, but there was something else in his expression too. Something that looked a lot like protectiveness. Sit, I just reviewed the intake notes from compliance, and I want to walk through what happens next. I sat, folding my hands to keep them still. Is there anything more in the report that I should know about? He nodded slowly, tapping the folder on his desk. The anonymous sender included references to your divorce, your counseling sessions after it, and a suggestion that you have been struggling with emotional regulation since last fall. None of that is framed in a clinical way. It reads like someone who has personal knowledge of you. My stomach dropped at the word personal. Ethan kept going. This could still be nothing. Sometimes people who mean well send misguided messages. Sometimes it is a misunderstanding. But given the content, we do need to conduct a formal review. I nodded because I could not trust my voice. Ethan noticed, and he softened his tone. Laura, you know your record here, your evaluations, your patient outcomes, your ability in high-pressure cases. This is not going to erase that. But we do need to find out who sent this and why. I swallowed hard. Do you think someone from the hospital is behind it? I doubt it. The details in here are very specific. Too specific. He did not say the next part. But I heard it anyway. Someone close to you. When I walked out of his office, the air in the hallway felt heavier. I found an empty bench near the atrium and sat until the noise around me blurred into a low hum. Then my phone buzzed. Grace, found something. Call me when you can. I called immediately and she answered with no greeting. The metadata is strange. The email was sent from a residential Wi-Fi network, not a public one. And the writing style keeps matching up with messages from someone I think you might want to look at. My chest tightened. Who? She hesitated just long enough for the truth to settle in before she said it. It matches patterns in text your sister sent to you. Same punctuation choices. Same phrasing. It is not proof, but it is close. The bench beneath me felt unsteady. I pressed my hand to my forehead, trying to make sense of the sharp buzzing in my ears. Grace, I whispered. She was at my parents' place yesterday laughing about it. She already knew. I thought I was imagining it, but she already knew. Grace sighed in that way friends do when they wish they could shield you. I am not saying it is her, but it is someone who writes exactly like her. The ride home was a blur. By the time I reached my apartment, the sun had shifted behind the clouds and the day had dimmed into a soft gray that made everything look suspended. I replayed every moment in that kitchen yesterday, every word Olivia had said, every smirk. I kept hearing her voice cutting through the noise. Maybe this is a wake-up call. Some of us learn to handle pressure. That afternoon, my father had told me she was sensitive. My mother had told me she felt insecure. But none of that explained the satisfaction in her eyes when she looked at me yesterday. None of that could justify the level of harm in that report. I went into my bedroom and sat on the floor beside the bed, the way I used to do when I was younger and trying to think clearly. Memories rose again, and this time I let them come. There was the time Olivia threw away a letter I was waiting for because she did not want me getting good news before she did. There was the time she told a boy I liked that I had a panic disorder, a lie so precise I never understood how she came up with it. There was the summer she spread a story about me being unstable so she would not have to share our room when cousins visited. Every memory had a thread of the same pattern. She liked control, she liked attention, and she liked when things went her way even if it meant tipping someone else off balance. As the memories settled, a single question rose above all the noise. If she had been willing to twist small things when we were young, what would she do now that we were adults with careers and reputations and lives built on more fragile ground? A knock at my door pulled me out of my thoughts. I stood and opened it to find Grace holding a folder. I came over in case you did not want to talk about this alone. I also printed the metadata extract. You should see it. I stepped aside and she walked in. We sat at the kitchen table as she slid the pages toward me. They were filled with strings of numbers and timestamps, not the kind of thing most people could decipher. But she pointed to a line that stood out: local network address and time of day. That is someone sending this from home, not from a phone on the move. Someone who felt comfortable and unhurried. I stared at the lines until my eyes began to blur. The truth was not complete yet, but it was forming. The shape was becoming unmistakable, and as much as it hurt, a part of me felt steadier with each detail we unearthed. Grace sat back and watched me gently. We will figure this out, but you need to prepare yourself. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. I nodded slowly, the ache in my chest deep but no longer directionless. I knew I could not accuse anyone without proof. I knew I had to be careful, measured, deliberate. But for the first time since the memo arrived, I felt a thin line of resolve begin to form inside me. Something was wrong, and someone wanted me to break. I was not going to give them that satisfaction. I folded the last page of the metadata report and set it aside, trying to quiet the dull pressure behind my eyes. The apartment had grown so still that I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. Grace watched me for a moment as if she wanted to say something else, but was waiting for the right opening. Before she could speak, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a number I did not recognize. I almost ignored it, but something nudged me to answer. A nervous breath came through first. Then a voice I had not heard in a long time. "Laura, it is Rachel. Please do not hang up. I need to talk to you." I froze. I had not spoken to Rachel Vaughn in years. She used to be Olivia's closest friend, practically woven into our family gatherings when we were teenagers. Then at some point she drifted away, and Olivia never explained why. I had not thought about her in a long time. I forced my voice steady. "Rachel, what is going on? Can I come by? I will not keep you long, I promise." There was something in her tone, thin and shaky, that made my chest tighten. I told her the address and hung up. Grace raised her eyebrows slightly but did not ask questions. She just said she would stay until I told her otherwise. 20 minutes later, a knock sounded at the door. When I opened it, Rachel was standing there with her coat still zipped and her hands clenched around a small phone. She looked older than I remembered, more tired around the eyes. There was a tension in her shoulders that had nothing to do with the cold outside. She stepped inside and glanced at Grace politely before turning to me. "I know this is strange," she said, "but I found something and I could not sit on it any longer." I gestured toward this table. "Sit if you want. Take your time." Rachel shook her head as if sitting would unravel her. Her voice trembled slightly. I knew Olivia could be hard sometimes, but I did not know that she could be cruel. At least not like this. I thought what she did back then was petty. But this is different. This is dangerous. I felt Grace shift beside me, but she stayed quiet. Rachel looked at me like someone bracing themselves before stepping into deep water. "Last month, Olivia came to my place." Rachel continued. "She was upset about something at work. She said people were starting to talk about how you were being seen as the rising star at the medical center. She said she was tired of always being compared to you. Then she had some wine. More than she usually does." Rachel swallowed hard and lifted her phone. I recorded a voice memo because she said she wanted me to help her with something. She said she had a plan. She said she knew exactly how to make you stumble. My breath caught. Grace leaned forward slightly, her expression sharpening. Rachel clicked play. Olivia's voice filled the room, slurred just enough to sound unguarded, but clear enough to cut through the space between us. I listened as my sister's voice spilled out words I knew she meant, even if she had spoken them through a haze of alcohol. "Laura acts like she is the strong one, but she is fragile. She just hides it better. All I have to do is remind people that she is not as steady as she looks. One nudge and she crumbles. And then everyone will finally see the truth." My hands went cold. The memo continued. Olivia laughed softly in the recording. "I am not hurting her. I am protecting my place. People forget I was the one they cared about first. I am not letting her outshine me. Not again." When the recording ended, the silence in the room felt heavy enough to bend the air. Rachel looked at me with eyes full of apology. "I should have come to you sooner. I know that. I was scared. She can be so manipulative, and I did not want to get pulled back into her drama. But when I heard what happened at your hospital, I knew it was connected. It had to be." My throat felt tight. I forced myself to speak. "Thank you for coming. You did not have to, and I know it was not easy. Rachel nodded and twisted her hands together. I have known her a long time. She has always needed to control how people see her. And you, she said quietly, were always the one she compared herself to. No matter what she pretended. Grace cleared her throat gently. Rachel, did she ever mention anything specific? About the hospital? About sending something? Rachel hesitated. She never said the words directly, but she told me she could ruin someone's week with a single message if she wanted to. And she said it while looking at her phone. She said she finally knew where to hit. I closed my eyes, feeling a sharp mix of sadness and clarity sweep over me. It was not just suspicion now. It was direction, a path forming. Rachel stepped back, pulling her coat tighter. I will send you the recording. And if you need me to talk to someone, I will do it. I am done protecting someone who does not care who she hurts. I walked her to the door and thanked her again. When she left, the apartment felt quieter than before, but not in a peaceful way. It was the quiet before something breaks open. Grace sat back down at the table, watching me with careful eyes. That recording is a lot. It is not proof she sent the report, but it is enough to support motive, and motive matters. I nodded slowly. My mind was already moving, connecting threads that had been floating loose for years. There was the time Olivia ripped up a letter from a professor who had praised my performance. She called it keeping me humble. There was the year she told extended family that I had been passed over for a scholarship, even though I had turned it down by choice. There were all the small ways she had chipped at my confidence, always wrapped in a smile. This was not new. This was only bigger. Grace's voice softened. What are you thinking? That this did not start with the memo, I said. It started a long time ago. The difference now is that she has something to lose. A career, a reputation, a marriage, and something to prove. Grace rested her elbows on the table. Then you need to be ready. If she did this, she will not expect you to fight back. She thinks you will retreat like before. I let the words sink in. Maybe she did think that. Maybe every time she had pushed me down, I had made it easier for her to believe she would never see me stand. A sound buzzed from my phone again. A text from my mother. Just checking in. Hope you are all right. Olivia did not mean anything by yesterday. I stared at the message until the letters seemed out of place. Then I set the phone face down on the table. Grace reached out and squeezed my hand. You are not alone in this. We will figure it out. Let the truth come out piece by piece. I nodded, drawing a slow breath as Rachel's recording replayed in my mind. Olivia's voice, slurred but sure of itself. One nudge and she crumbles. For most of my life, Olivia believed I would always break quietly. She believed she knew every weakness in me. She believed she was the only one who deserved to shine. But sitting there with the evidence gathering in front of me and the steady presence of someone who believed me, I felt the first real shift of something deeper. Not anger, not revenge. Not yet. It was the beginning of seeing her without the lens I had used for decades. Not as my sister, not as the girl who needed compassion, but as someone who had never been taught that there were limits to what she could do. The room grew still again. Grace stood and walked toward the door, giving me a small nod before she left. When the door clicked shut, I sat alone at the table, Rachel's words and Olivia's voice still twisting in the air around me. The silence pressed in, but this time it did not make me feel small. It made the truth louder. Something was unfolding, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to follow where it led. The truth did not feel abstract anymore. It settled into the room with me after Grace left, filling the air with a kind of heaviness I could not ignore. I sat there for a long time with the folder open in front of me, the printed pages spread out like pieces of a puzzle that had already begun forming an image I did not want to see but could no longer look away from. By evening, the light outside had dimmed to a soft haze drifting in through the blinds. I stood, stretched the stiffness from my shoulders, and forced myself to move. If I stayed still any longer, I would slip back into the years when silence was my safest place. I was not going back to that. I made tea in the kitchen, the simple rhythm helping my thoughts settle into something more focused. The steam rose in gentle spirals as I leaned over the counter and stared at the wall. Grace's words circled my mind. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. I knew who she meant. I also knew Grace was right to be careful about calling it out too soon. Evidence was the only thing that would matter now. Intent did not carry weight unless it could be proven. I carried the tea to the couch and pulled my laptop onto my knees. I typed slowly at first, pulling up old emails, receipts, anything that might show some trace of unusual activity. As I clicked through folders, I noticed a strange transaction on a long unused online store account that I had forgotten I ever created, one tied to an old financial aid application from college, a small purchase dated 2 months earlier. I stared at it. I had not touched that account in nearly 15 years. A cold pulse tightened in my chest. Someone had used my information. The account had been reopened using my name. I snapped a picture of the screen and forwarded it to Michael Turner with a short message asking if this meant anything. He responded almost immediately asking if he could call. I answered and tried to keep my voice steady as I explained what I had found. Michael listened without interrupting. When I finished, he spoke in a measured tone, the one he used when he needed me to hear every word. "It is not proof of fraud," he said, "but it is evidence that someone accessed personal information tied to you. It strengthens the case that a family member might have been involved. College financial aid files are not easily accessed by strangers." My hand tightened around the phone. I had filled that paperwork out at home one spring afternoon. I remembered sitting at the dining room table, Olivia on the couch behind me flipping through a magazine, making comments about how she would have to apply too and how annoying it was going to be. I remembered leaving the documents on the table when I went to take a call. I remembered nothing else. Michael continued speaking. "This kind of account history shows pattern, not guilt, but pattern is important. Keep tracking anything unusual. And Laura, document everything, even conversations that seem small." I thanked him and hung up, my pulse thudding in my throat. The past felt closer than ever, like old dust shaken loose after years of settling. A sharp knock startled me. I set the phone down and walked to the door, half expecting Grace to have returned with another folder. Instead, a familiar figure stood in the hallway, shifting uncomfortably on his feet. Evan. He looked like he had not slept much. His hair was unkempt, his jaw rough with stubble. He glanced down the hallway before meeting my eyes. "I said I would stay out of it," he murmured. "But I cannot, not anymore. Can I come in?" I stepped aside and let him in. He stood near the entryway, rubbing the back of his neck like he was afraid of what he might say if he relaxed too much. "I need to ask something," he said. "Did Olivia give you any indication that she might reach out to your workplace?" I blinked at him. "No." She laughed when I told her what happened. She acted like she knew already. He closed his eyes briefly, then nodded as if something inside him had just fallen into place. "I should have talked to you sooner," he said. "Something was wrong weeks before all this. She was obsessing over your performance reviews. I did not understand it at the time. Then one night she borrowed my work laptop because her tablet would not load a document. I thought nothing of it until today when I checked my device logs and found an odd sign into an email account that was not hers or mine. My throat went dry. "What kind of email?" He hesitated. It looked like an alias, a dummy account that had been created and deleted in the same window, and the timestamp matches the day your hospital received the complaint. I stared at him, unable to find words. He looked back at me with a troubled sincerity I had never seen in him before. "Laura, I do not want to believe she would cross that kind of boundary, but she has been under pressure lately. Financial, emotional, work-related. And every time she talked about struggling, she came back to you. She said you made her look small. I think she convinced herself she had to get ahead of you before you did it to her." Heat flared in my chest, a mixture of sorrow and disbelief. I never did anything to her. He nodded slowly. "I know that. But she sees the world in comparisons. She always has." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I printed this. It is the device log that flagged the alias account. It is not absolute proof, but it is something." He placed the paper on the kitchen table, the same table where I had sat hours earlier with Grace and Rachel's recording. The evidence was gathering, piece by piece, each part pointing toward the same impossible direction. Evan exhaled. "I am not protecting her this time. Not if she did this." I felt something heavy shift inside me, a sadness, maybe, or the quiet breaking of whatever illusions still lingered about who Olivia really was. "Thank you," I said softly. "I know this is not easy." He shook his head. Easy stopped being an option a long time ago. He walked to the door but paused just before opening it. "If she asks, I did not come here. I do not know how she will react, and I'm not ready to tell her I found the logs. I nodded and he left without another word. The apartment fell still again. I looked around at the papers now scattered across the table, the mosaic of a truth that had always been there but never spoken. The metadata, the voice recording, the reopened account, the device log, all of it pointing, unmistakably, toward Olivia. I sat down slowly, resting my hands flat on the table as the quiet stretched around me. It was a different kind of quiet now, not the suffocating kind that settled when I doubted myself, but a steady one that allowed space for something else to grow. Resolve, and the faint beginning of understanding that whatever came next would not be as simple as exposing what she had done. Families break in very particular ways. The cracks run long and deep and never fall cleanly. The last of the daylight faded from the window. I looked at the papers again, then leaned back in the chair, letting the silence settle. Something was unfolding, and now there was no stopping it. I stayed at the table until the light disappeared completely, long enough for the shapes of the papers in front of me to blur into soft outlines. The quiet pressed in, steady and dense, and yet something inside me had begun to move. The fear that had followed me since the memo arrived was no longer spreading. It had condensed into something sharper, something closer to truth. When I finally stood, the room felt too small for the thoughts that kept forming. I walked to the window and looked down at the parking lot where a few porch lights flickered on, casting pale circles across the pavement. The world outside looked normal. Nothing about it suggested that my life had been tilted off its axis by someone who shared my blood. A faint buzz shook my phone inside my pocket. I checked the screen and saw a text from Michael. "Call when you are free." I dialed immediately. He picked up with a low sigh. "I have been reviewing what you sent me. The reopened account is concerning, but the device log is more important. If Evan is willing to talk, this could help establish a pattern of intent." My chest tightened. He is not ready to confront her. And honestly, I understand why. This would tear his life apart. Michael paused. "I get that. But you need to protect yourself. Whoever sent that report crossed a serious line. If they use your personal information once, they can do it again." I pressed my fingers to my forehead. "I know. I just do not want to get ahead of myself." "Then take it one step at a time. Do not accuse anyone openly. For now, gather facts. And Laura, do not talk to your sister about this. Not until we know more." After we hung up, I stood there in the dim kitchen and let his words settle. Do not talk to your sister. It sounded simple enough, but part of me wished I could walk up to her, place all the evidence between us, and demand an explanation. Demand the truth from the only person who had been shaping my story behind my back. But Olivia had never responded to confrontation with honesty. She responded with charm or anger or silence. Depending on what suited the moment, the truth was never something she gave freely. A knock jarred me again, softer this time, not the frantic sound Rachel had made earlier. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Evan, he stood in the hallway, hands in his pockets as if holding something steady inside himself. I opened the door and he stepped in, glancing around like he expected Olivia to appear from behind the furniture. "Sorry," he said quietly. "I know I was here earlier, but something else happened tonight and I thought you should hear it from me." I gestured toward the living room and he followed slowly. When he spoke again, his voice sounded rough. I asked Olivia about the alias account. Not directly, just in a roundabout way. I told her I noticed strange activity on my laptop and that I was going to have the IT team at my job trace it. My breath caught. What did she say? Evan shook his head like he still could not believe it. She panicked. Not outwardly, but I know her tells. Her hands shook. She said something about how people get hacked all the time, and I should not make a big deal out of it. Then she asked if I had told anyone else. The way she asked made my skin crawl. I leaned forward slightly. What did you tell her? The truth? That I had not. But I left out the part about coming here. I let out a slow breath. Did she seem guilty? He lifted his eyes to mine. She seemed afraid. And Olivia is not someone who gets afraid easily. We sat in silence for a few seconds, the weight of his words settling between us. Evan rubbed his palms together as if trying to warm them. That is not all. She said something odd before I left the house tonight. She said that sometimes people need reminders about who they are. That pressure builds character. And then she said she hoped you were finally learning your limits. A cold heaviness settled at the base of my spine. She said that. He nodded. My pulse picked up. Those were almost the same words she had used in the recording Rachel played. The same sentiment. The same spite wrapped in faux concern. The consistency of it twisted something deep inside me. Evan sat back, his shoulders slumping. "I am losing her," he said quietly. Or maybe I am seeing her clearly for the first time. I cannot tell which. I studied him for a moment. He looked older than he had that afternoon, more worn around the edges. There was a sadness in his eyes that told me he had been fighting to hold something together long before any of this happened. "Are you all right?" I asked softly. He let out a dry laugh. "No, but I will be." He stood and pulled a small flash drive from his pocket. "I saved a copy of the device log on here. Keep it somewhere safe. I do not know what she might do if she realizes I am looking into this." I hesitated before reaching for it. "Thank you for trusting me with this." He looked around the room again as if making sure everything was real, then met my eyes. "It is not about trust. It is about doing what is right. Someone needs to stop her, and I think you might be the only one who can." After he left, I sat on the couch holding the flash drive in my palm. The metal felt cool against my skin, grounding. Outside, the wind rattled lightly against the window, pushing a thin branch to tap the glass. The steady rhythm pulled me into thought. I had spent most of my life convincing myself Olivia's behavior came from insecurity or emotional fragility, that if I gave her space or forgiveness or silence, things would improve. But tonight something shifted. Evan had seen the cracks too, the ones I had been taught to ignore, the ones that had grown wide enough for my life to fall into. I placed the flash drive on the table next to the stack of papers. Evidence. Proof. Pieces of a truth that had been forming like a shadow stretching across the floor. The apartment felt colder than usual, so I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and walked to the window. The lights across the lot glowed softly in the dark. A few cars passed, tires hissing against the asphalt. Somewhere a dog barked and the echoes faded into the night. I pressed my forehead lightly against the cool glass and closed my eyes. I remembered the summer before I left for college, when Olivia told our cousins that I had gotten into Seattle University only because of a pity essay. I remembered the sting of those words and how quickly everyone brushed them aside. Olivia is just joking. She does not mean it. She praises you all the time when you are not around. But she never had. She had only chipped, pushed, twisted. And I had let her, believing that keeping the peace was better than acknowledging the truth. Now the truth was undeniable. I stepped back from the window and looked at the scattered evidence, each part small on its own, each part dismissible if taken out of context. But together they formed something unmistakable. Intent. Olivia had not simply wanted to humiliate me in a kitchen full of relatives. She had wanted to undermine something larger, something harder to rebuild. My reputation, my career, my sense of stability. My heartbeat steadied, not from fear, but from clarity. Whatever came next would not be easy, but I was no longer standing blind in the dark. The pieces were falling into place, and now I had to decide what to do with them. I woke the next morning with the sense that something inside me had settled into place, not comfortably, but with the finality of a door clicking shut. The air in my apartment felt different, as if the walls themselves knew what the next step would be. I lay there for a few minutes staring at the ceiling, letting the quiet fold around me. Then I got up, showered, dressed, and gathered the documents that had become the strange new map of my life. I knew I could not avoid my parents forever, and I knew the longer I stayed silent, the more control Olivia would keep over the story she had already started telling. A truth becomes harder to uproot once it takes hold, especially in families like mine, where appearances mattered more than honesty ever had. As I drove to Karen County, the sky hung low with the color of winter steel. The freeway was half empty, the kind of morning that made the world feel muted and suspended. I kept both hands tight on the wheel, my pulse steady but strong. I was not driving there to accuse or to fight. I was driving there because I needed them to hear the truth before someone else fed them a version of it that left me looking like the villain. When I pulled up to my parents' house, the curtains in the living room shifted slightly. Someone had been watching for me. I parked, stepped out, and walked toward the front door. Before I could knock, my mother opened it, her face lined with the worry she wore, like an accessory she never took off. She touched my arm. I have been praying you would come by. We did not end things well the other day. I nodded, stepping inside. The house smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. My father sat at the dining table with the newspaper spread in front of him. Though he was not reading it, he looked up with an expression caught between relief and dread. Your sister called, he said. She is worried about you. A small laugh escaped me before I could stop it. The idea of Olivia worrying about anyone but herself felt almost cinematic. Where is she? I asked. In the backyard. She brought some documents over. Something about a project at work. She said she might stay the afternoon. Of course she had. Olivia never missed a chance to fold herself into a narrative first. My mother gestured for me to sit, but I stayed standing. My hands were already shaking slightly, so I clasped them together. I need both of you to listen. My father shifted. My mother folded her arms gently across her stomach, bracing herself. I took a breath. Someone sent an anonymous report to my hospital. It questioned my emotional stability and professionalism. It cited private information about my divorce and counseling records. Information only family would know. My mother's face went pale. My father's jaw tightened. I continued. I did not want to believe anyone in this house could do something like that. I still do not want to believe it, but I have been gathering information and talking to people I trust. And the evidence points in one direction. Before I could finish, my mother shook her head once, sharply. Laura, do not do this. You know how sensitive your sister is. She did not send anything to your workplace. I braced myself. I had expected this. The reflexive defense. The quick shield raised before a single fact had been heard. Dad, Mom, I have a voice recording from her. She told someone she had a plan to make me stumble. That she knew where to hit. That she wanted to remind people I am not as steady as they think. My father looked down at the table again, his shoulders slumping inward. My mother pressed a trembling hand to her lips. For a moment no one spoke. Then she whispered, as if trying to outrun the truth. Maybe she was venting. Maybe she was hurt. Maybe she did not mean it. She meant it, I said softly. My father stood abruptly and walked toward the window, rubbing the back of his neck. He murmured something I could not catch. When he turned back to me, his eyes looked haunted. What evidence do you have? I laid the folder on the table, the metadata Grace had pulled. The reopened account tied to my old financial aid forms. The device log Evan had brought. The voice memo from Rachel. My father flipped through the pages slowly, his brow tightening with each line. My mother backed away as if the papers themselves were poisonous. Then she turned and hurried into the kitchen, her breath catching. I heard her whispering Olivia's name like a plea. My father lowered the final page. His voice was low, unsteady. This is serious. You could lose your career over this. I nodded, yes. Which is why we cannot pretend it did not happen. He stared at the papers again, then at me. I could see the war inside him. Loyalty on one side, truth on the other, and all the years he had spent ignoring the damage Olivia caused tipping the scale. I waited for him to speak, but a sudden motion from the backyard caught my eye. Through the glass door, I saw Olivia walking toward the house carrying a folder of her own. She was smiling, relaxed, unaware of the storm waiting inside. She stepped in through the back door. The smile faded when she saw my face. And then she saw the folder on the table. Her expression tightened. Just a flicker, but enough to tell me everything I needed to know. She set her folder down on the counter. What is all this? My father stared at her with an expression I had never seen him wear before. Old confusion, new fear. Helen stood behind her, wringing her hands, whispering her name again. Olivia gave her a small dismissive wave and turned to me with forced calm. What is going on? I held her gaze. Someone sent a damaging report to my hospital. Someone with access to my private information. And the evidence points to you. She blinked, the surprise in her face too quick and too controlled. Then she scoffed lightly. You think I would jeopardize your job? That is insane. My father picked up the device log, then explained this. For the first time, Olivia's confidence slipped. Her eyes darted to the page, then to him, then back to me. She opened her mouth, closed it, then forced a laugh. That is nothing. That is Evan being dramatic. He always exaggerates. I said quietly. I talked to Rachel. Her face drained of color. She told me you said you knew exactly how to make me stumble, that all you needed was one nudge. Olivia's breathing quickened. She looked toward the door as if she wanted to run, then looked back at me, her voice rising. You do not understand. You never understand. Everything in this family has always been about you. You come home and everyone fawns over how accomplished you are. Nobody sees how hard I work. Nobody sees what I deal with every day. My father broke in, his voice sharp. Olivia, stop. Answer the question. Did you send the report? The room froze. My mother covered her mouth. I waited. The silence stretched thin like thread pulled tight. Olivia swallowed, her throat trembling. Then her eyes hardened. Fine, maybe I sent something. Maybe. But I did it because someone had to remind them you are not perfect. You get praised for breathing. I get blamed for everything. My father stepped back as if she had struck him. My mother let out a soft sob. I stared at Olivia, feeling a hollow ache spreading through my chest. Not anger, not even shock, just the breaking of something that had cracked years ago and finally split clean. She looked at me with a defiant glint. You deserved a wake-up call. I did not answer. I could not. My father sank into a chair, head in his hands. My mother whispered Olivia's name again, but this time it was not a plea. It was disbelief. I stepped back from the table, the house suddenly too full of air that would not move. Olivia's confession hung between us, heavy and irreversible. I realized then that nothing in our family would ever be the same again. And as I looked at her, standing there with her chin lifted in the wreckage she had caused, I knew this was only the beginning of what had to come next. The room stayed suspended in a strange, airless quiet. No one moved. My father kept his face buried in his hands. My mother stood frozen near the counter as if a single step might shatter whatever brittle balance still existed between all of us. And Olivia looked at me with that same defiance, chin lifted, daring me to speak, daring me to react, daring me to be the one who made this moment real. I did not trust my voice, so I did not use it. I picked up the folder from the table, the one that held every piece of what she had done, and I closed it gently. That small motion seemed to snap something in the air. Olivia flinched at the sound, barely noticeable but there. My father finally lifted his head, his eyes hollow with a kind of exhaustion I had never seen in him. He whispered my name like an apology, but I shook my head softly. There was nothing he could say that would touch what had already broken. I walked toward the front door. My mother reached out as if to stop me, fingers brushing my sleeve in a desperate plea not to leave them with the truth. I stepped back before she could grip me, not harshly, just enough. I said nothing to Olivia. There was nothing left between us that words could repair. I walked outside into the gray afternoon, the air sharp and cold on my skin. For a long moment, I simply stood on the porch, letting the quiet ease into me. Then I walked to my car, opened the door, and drove away. I did not look back. The drive to Seattle felt strangely calm, the kind of calm that follows a storm breaking open, when the world is suddenly too quiet. I reached my apartment and sat in the parking garage for a few minutes before going upstairs. My phone buzzed twice, a text from my father, then one from my mother. I did not open either. Instant, I set the folder on the counter and tried to breathe through the ache pressing against my ribs. I had expected pain, but not this particular weight. It was not just betrayal. It was the final acceptance of who Olivia had chosen to be. A sharp knock at the door jolted me. I wiped my face and opened it. Dr. Ethan Clark stood there, still in his gray coat from the hospital, looking like he had come straight from rounds. His expression was serious but gentle. "Laura," he said quietly, "I need to talk to you. May I come in?" I stepped aside, unsure whether I should brace myself or feel relieved. He walked in and removed his coat, setting it across the back of a chair. He looked tired, but there was something steady in his gaze that calmed the rising pulse in my chest. "We finished the review," he said. "It did not take long. The report has been verified as fraudulent. The sources it cited were not legitimate medical records. Some of the language matched previous notes you had written, which suggests someone familiar with your communication style attempted to mimic it. And the hospital's cybersecurity team traced the submission to a home network." I swallowed hard. "Did they identify the sender?" He shook his head. "The alias account was deleted shortly after the message was sent. But the important part is this. You are cleared completely. There will be no mark on your record. You can return to work immediately." A wave of relief washed over me so suddenly my knees felt weak. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes for a moment. Ethan continued, his tone softening. You have strong advocates here. We know your work. We know your integrity. Whoever tried to undermine you did not succeed. I nodded, unable to speak. After a moment, he added, You have a right to know this too. Hospital leadership is contacting legal counsel to determine whether the matter needs to be escalated. They may reach out to you in the next few weeks. I felt a quiet shift inside me, not fear, and not the helplessness that had clung to me since the memo arrived. Something steadier, something like truth settling into its proper place. Thank you, I finally said, for everything. He gave a small smile, the kind that warmed more than it showed. You earned this trust long before any of this happened. When he left, I stood in the silence of my apartment with my breath slowly returning to its normal rhythm. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, a different emotion rose in me, something almost mournful. I had wanted the truth, and I had it, but the cost of knowing it was heavier than I expected. My phone buzzed again. This time it was not my parents. It was Evan. I need to talk. Can I call? I answered and heard him take a shaky breath on the other end. It all blew up here, Laura. She knows I looked at the logs. She knows I came to see you. She is furious. She threw her phone against the wall and accused me of choosing you over her. My heart sank a little. I am sorry. I never wanted to drag you into this. He let out a quiet laugh with no humor in it. You did not drag me. I walked in on my own, and I should have seen it long before now. But I need you to know something else. She admitted part of it tonight, not directly, but she said you had gotten too comfortable and someone had to hold you accountable. It was almost the same words she used when she talked about the alias account. I closed my eyes, the heaviness returning. Did she say anything else? He hesitated. She said you always take everything from her, that you make her invisible, that people only care about you. I exhaled slowly. The layers of Olivia's story had always been about comparison, a scale she had created herself. Evan continued in a weary voice. I am leaving for a few days. I need space to think. I cannot stay in that house right now. If you need anything, I said, let me know. He stayed quiet for a moment. Then he said softly, Thank you, Laura, and hung up. I stood there in the dim light of my kitchen, feeling the pieces shift again. Olivia had not only broken something in me, she had broken something in her own life too, something she may not have understood until it was too late. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Cars moved along the streets like thin ribbons of light. People were out living ordinary lives, unaware of the unraveling that had taken place in mine. A strange calm washed over me. My career was intact. The hospital believed me. The truth had begun to rise to the surface. But one thing remained undone. My parents, they had not spoken the truth out loud. Not yet. And something told me their silence would not hold much longer. The truth had a way of unsettling everything around it. I stood at the window until the city lights blurred, then wiped my eyes and turned away. Tomorrow would come, and with it, whatever remained between me and the people who had helped shape the story, I was finally learning how to rewrite. I woke early the next morning with a sense that something inside me had finally grown quiet. Not empty, not hollow, just settled. The sun had barely risen above the skyline, and the apartment still held the soft gray of dawn. For the first time in weeks, my chest did not feel like it was carrying a weight I could not name. I brewed coffee, opened the windows, and let the cold air drift inside. Everything smelled like new beginnings, sharp and clean. When I arrived at Seattle Medical Center, the lobby felt strangely familiar, like returning to a place I had left only briefly, but with too much fear. The receptionist waved, and a few nurses I knew nodded or smiled with that warm, unspoken message that everything was all right now. It felt like stepping back onto the ground after weeks of drifting. I walked to my office slowly, taking in the rhythm of the building, the steady hum of morning rounds, the click of wheels on tile floors, the low chatter of residents trying to pretend they were fully awake. I dropped my bag on my chair and touched the edge of my desk, grounding myself. A minute later, there was a soft knock. Dr. Ethan Clark stepped in holding a folder. Good to see you back, he said with that quiet assurance of his. We missed you around here. I smiled, a real one this time. It felt effortless. Thank you for standing by me. He gave a small shake of his head as if the idea surprised him. You earned that long before this happened. We are glad to have you return. He handed me a stack of new assignments. Nothing heavy, nothing overwhelming, and I understood immediately this was his way of offering steady footing again. I appreciated it more than he probably knew. When he left, I sat down and stared at the blank computer screen for a moment, letting the normalcy of it wash over me. I had survived. My work was intact. My name was cleared. But more than that, I had chosen myself in a way I never had before. Later that afternoon, as I walked toward the exit, I heard someone call my name. It was Grace, holding 2 coffees. She handed one to me and grinned. "Look at you," she said. "You look lighter." I took a sip and laughed softly. "I feel lighter." We stood there for a moment in the hallway, not needing to say much. Sometimes survival speaks for itself. I headed home afterward, ready to breathe in the quiet, but halfway there my phone rang. It was my mother. I stared at the screen before answering, unsure how steady my voice would be. She spoke before I could even say hello. "Your father and I want to talk. We know we should have listened sooner." Her voice trembled. For the first time I heard something that sounded like accountability, not excuses, not deflection, just the beginning of understanding. I took a breath. "Mom, we will talk, but not today. I need a little more time." I could almost feel her nod through the silence. "All right, whenever you are ready." When I hung up, I let the words linger in my mind. It was not forgiveness yet, but it was the space where forgiveness might one day grow. For now, that was enough. Later that evening, as I walked into my apartment, I found an envelope under my door. No name, no return address. My chest tightened for a moment until I realized the handwriting was familiar. Evans. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I contacted HR at Evergreen Furniture. I told them everything. They are opening an investigation into Olivia's behavior. I am staying with my brother for a while. Thank you for not letting her keep the truth buried. Evan. I folded the note and placed it on the table. A strange ache moved through me. Not grief exactly, but something like acceptance. Olivia's life was unraveling, not because I wanted it, but because she had built it on top of too many lies. Now the weight of them had finally tipped. I stepped onto my balcony and watched the city lights sharpen as the night deepened. Somewhere below, a dog barked. A couple laughed. A bus hissed against the curb as it slowed. Life kept moving, uncaring and unstoppable. It felt comforting to know I could move with it again. As I stood there, I thought about all the years I bent myself into shapes to keep the peace. How often I had chosen silence over truth. How long I tolerated the slow erosion of my own worth because I believed loyalty to family meant absorbing everything they asked of me. But real loyalty is mutual. Real love has boundaries. And survival sometimes means stepping away from the people who taught you to shrink. I walked back inside, turned off the lights, and let the apartment rest in the soft glow of the street lamps filtering through the blinds. The quiet no longer felt threatening. It felt earned. This chapter of my life would close soon, not with a dramatic confrontation or a final explosion, but with a quiet decision. A decision to move forward with the parts of myself that had been waiting for space to breathe. A decision to release the weight of family expectations that had pressed against me since childhood. A decision to stop apologizing for standing up. As I sat on the couch, watching the last traces of daylight slip behind the buildings, I felt something shift. Not a breaking, a kind of rising. And as I hold that feeling, I want to thank you for staying with me through this story. If it resonated with you in any way, I would love to hear your thoughts, your experiences, your reflections. Feel free to share, comment, or stay with the channel for more stories that remind us we are not alone in the hard things we face. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is choose ourselves. And sometimes choosing ourselves is how we finally learn to rise.